Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world. And this is part 4 of our story tonight. I hope you're doing very well. And of course that you had a fabulous Thanksgiving last week. It's so good to be with you again, and I hope you celebrated and had a really fabulous time, because we're getting closer and closer to the Christmas season and we've got a lot to be thankful for. And so before we continue, we know in the story that Jack is missing his golden retriever Lassie that was snatched from him in broad daylight while he was taking Lassie for a walk to the doggy park. So he's very devastated that his dog has gone missing. So is he ever going to find Lassie again? We're about to find out. So let's continue with our story. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 4 of our story. 2 months later, Jack's account. "But why?" I challenged my mother, pulling a face. "Do we really have to do this?" "I'm afraid so, Jack. You know what Gertie's like. You know how insistent that woman can be. It's impossible to say no to her." "But why can't you say no to her, Mum? Stand up for yourself, for goodness sake. Daddy always says you let Gertie intimidate you." "I do no such thing, Jack. Of course I can stand up to the woman." "But, Mum, you yourself said Gertie's only going away for a 2-week holiday. It's not that long. Why would she want us to live in her house? Surely she can leave her house unattended for 2 weeks. When we go away, that's what we do, don't we? And even when Lassie was around, we took her away with us, so no one had to look after her. I'm sure Gertie's house will be fine and will still be standing when she gets back from her holiday," I said sarcastically. "Gertie can get paranoid, as you know only too well. She's very concerned that if she goes away, someone might break into her house. These days you can't be sure if someone is secretly watching your property or not. Gertie's a very wealthy woman. She's got some valuable antiques in that house of hers, and some expensive paintings that could go for a sizable amount of money. So her house would likely be targeted by a burglar if they were to know she had gone away. Criminals these days are very savvy, you know, Jack. Gertie wants someone around on the premises so that any intruders will keep away if they know that somebody's present in the house. Besides anything else, she wants me to look after her plants that need to be watered once a week. And she wants us to maintain a presence on the property, so people will know that the house is always occupied." "But why must we move into Gertie's house for her when we live here, Mum? Can't she find someone else to look after her premises for her? There are people who do that for a living, aren't there? You get house sitters online, don't you? Why is Gertie always getting us to do her dirty work for her?" "Gertie would never settle for a stranger looking after her house. Surely you know that, Jack. Anyway, apart from anything else, I've agreed to do this for her. Your father will be staying here at our house while we're living at Gertie's, and he's kindly promised to paint some of the bedrooms in our home, which will be a big bonus for us because it's about time they got attended to. He says he's behind on the general maintenance of our house, and will be glad if we're out of his hair for a while, so that he can get things done. There's a loose cupboard that needs readjusting in the kitchen, a dripping tap that's been causing no end of problems, and a loo that's not flushing as efficiently as it should be. So while we're away, he'll oversee to those problems, hopefully fix them for us. We'll be moving into Gertie's house, just the 3 of us, only for 2 weeks, no more than that. It's a lovely area, beautiful woodland trails behind the property. You and your sister can go cycling there as often as you like. It'll be a lovely change of scene for all of us, Jack, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised of how much you will enjoy yourself there. I know you've never liked Gertie, but her property is spacious and very upmarket. A welcome change to our home, don't you think?" "But why are you doing this for Gertie, Mum? What has she ever done for us?" I piped indignantly. "She comes to dinner every Friday night, doesn't she? She picks fault at everything you cook. She tells you when she thinks you're picking up a little weight, or when she abhors your hairstyle or a dress you're wearing. And you never ever say a mean word back to her. Because, Jack, it's not in my nature to be rude to my guests, not even Gertie. You know the woman. She lets her tongue run away with her at times. But I'm well used to her by now, so anything she says does not offend me any more. I've learnt to rise above it, and you should follow in my example too. You take that woman far too seriously, Jack. But I hate her, I said. She thinks she's a replacement grandmother for me because your sister died, but she'll never ever be that. Now, Jack, aren't you being a tad unkind about the poor woman? She's not poor, Mum, I said indignantly. She's stinking rich, and I have not seen her look so happy for Friday night dinner as she does now, because she's glad Lassie isn't around any more. She hated Lassie, and that's why I hate her, I said with conviction. Last Friday she was saying how nice the house smelt without the bag of fleas around. She called Lassie a bag of fleas. She said she was glad she could sit on our couch without getting covered in hairs. She exaggerates all the time, because our house doesn't smell, and she barely got any of Lassie's hairs on her clothes when she came to our house. That's true, Jack, I know it is. But you must remember, one dog hair on Gertie's clothes is too many for the woman. I know she's not an easy woman to understand, Jack. But it's not necessary to chastise her character like this, just because she doesn't like animals. She's a bit of a clean freak, we both know that. Some people are that way inclined. It doesn't make her a bad person, you know. I know she's capriciously difficult to understand, and her perception of the world is very different to our own. But at the end of the day, I need to remind you she is family, and blood is thicker than water. People that don't like animals should never ever be trusted, I said adamantly. I still think it's very suspicious the way her husband died all those years ago, in that so-called freak accident. I bet she killed him, because she wanted all his money. I wouldn't be remotely surprised if that is what really happened. I wouldn't put anything past that money-grubbing woman. My sister Angie interceded. Jack's right, Mum. I wouldn't be surprised if Gertie did kill her husband. Remember, they were going to get divorced, and then very conveniently he cleans his rifle one day, forgets it's loaded, and ends up shooting himself. Something doesn't add up. I bet she killed him. I think Gertie is a calculating woman. I really do. My mother looked physically appalled and disgusted that Angie and I were talking about her mother's sister like this. But there really was something questionable about how her husband had died all those years ago. And even my father had said as much. But my mother had shut him down at once and said he was talking absolute nonsense, and that of course Gertie wouldn't harm a fly. I wasn't so sure that was true. Gertie's husband had been cleaning his rifle, according to Gertie, and forgot that it was loaded. I just didn't buy that for a single second. But as usual, Gertie had persuaded everybody it was an accident. She said that her husband had been suffering from lapses in memory and was increasingly absent-minded. She said it wasn't the first time he'd cleaned his rifle fully loaded. Even the coroner confirmed her husband's death to be accidental. But me and my sister and my dad weren't fooled for a single second, although Gertie had undoubtedly pulled the wool over my mother's eyes. Yes, my mother knew that Gertie was cantankerous and belligerently capricious at times, but she definitely didn't think Gertie was capable of murder. But the look that woman gave Lassie sometimes was a look that spoke 1,000 words as far as I was concerned. And that look said, I'd kill you myself, you flea bag, if only I got the chance. Gertie's husband had been an upstanding man of noble character, who I'd liked very much. He had also been punctiliously methodical in everything he did, and I had never noticed that he had any signs of becoming absent-minded. On the contrary, I thought he was a whole lot sharper than Gertie actually was. I knew in my gut he'd have never ever cleaned a fully loaded rifle. He wasn't a complete moron. I do know that Gertie was not remotely happy about getting a divorce. When her husband told her one day that he couldn't tolerate living with her for a second longer and was filing for a divorce, Gertie was incensed. I think that although Gertie didn't care that her husband was ending their relationship, what she did care about was losing out on his vast fortune. My guess was she actually shot him and successfully made it look like an accident. As it happens, when I was staying at Gertie's house, I did happen to find a book in her bookcase about how to commit the perfect murder, and I always wondered if the book had inspired Gertie to do the unthinkable as far as her husband was concerned, but that was something that could never be proved. One thing was for sure, I didn't want to spend any time at Gertie's house, even if she did live in a beautiful home in a lovely area, as it meant living among all Gertie's things that probably even smelt of the nauseating woman, and the thought of it was quite discombobulating to say the very least. "How can you talk about Gertie like this?" my mother said. "I know you don't like her, Jack, but suggesting that she deliberately killed her husband is deplorable. The both of you should be ashamed." My mother was filled with indignance as she glared at me and my sister, almost as if we'd both committed an unforgivable sin for merely expressing our opinion on the matter. "I don't care what you say, Mum," Angie said, "but I know Gertie killed her husband. And anyway, I don't want to go and stay at her house," she protested. "Why do we have to go and stay there? This is our home. I don't want to live in Gertie's house among all her things. I've had my fill of her every single Friday night dinner. And Jack's right. She's glad that Lassie's gone." "Enough of tearing Gertie apart, children. You're like a couple of coyotes, aren't you? Tearing up an innocent animal apart. That's just horrendous. You shouldn't be speaking about her like this." "You mean tearing a skunk apart?" I said spitefully. "One that smells rancidly bad." "Enough, Jack. Would you please stop demeaning Gertie like this? It's most unbecoming of you. Do I really need to spell it out to the both of you as to why the three of us are going to stay at Gertie's? It seems that I do. You both know Gertie is a very wealthy woman. She's offered to pay me handsomely for moving into her house for 2 weeks to look after the place. It's money I cannot afford to refuse. Sometimes me and your father struggle to pay all the bills, so making this extra money is a godsend for us. It's for this reason I couldn't refuse Gertie's request. Don't you worry, I'll make sure we have a good time together. I promise you that." "But what about Dad?" I asked. "Were you not listening to a single thing I said, Jack? How many times do I need to repeat myself to you kids? Your father is going to be just fine at home. He's going to do some maintenance projects around the house while we're away. I've already told you that. He'll be fine. We'll see him in 2 weeks' time when Gertie returns from her holiday." Gertie lived 45 minutes away from us, in an area in Philadelphia where, like many parts of this state, urban can actually meet up with the natural world on your front doorstep, as if both are masterfully intertwined, rather like two twin sisters that hang out together but are extremely different. One is sporty and laid back, the other very modern and sophisticated, and yet they manage to live together side by side, very comfortably. Bertie lived in an affluent neighbourhood, where the houses boasted reasonably sizable properties. Bertie's house and the other houses in her street were fortunate enough to overlook a heavily wooded area that boasted a plethora of hiking trails that many adventurous outdoorsy types of people would explore, especially over the weekends. It was quite common to see cyclists wearing helmets and cycling shorts ambling down the trail, or a couple taking their dogs for a walk there. Gertie had lived in her classic timeless-looking home for over 40 long years. The house was painted white and had huge bay windows and a grey roof, along with a navy blue front door. It boasted a perfectly manicured front lawn, with pruned hedges and flower beds that boasted hardy perennials and plenty of white roses, and an abundance of glossy greenery. The house smelt pungently of Gertie, which was most unsettling for me. If Gertie weren't alive, I would seriously believe her ghost was probably haunting the place. Everywhere I went, I could smell her odious lavender perfume, and her sweet-scented talcum powder, which was extremely overpowering, and made me feel queasy and green at the gills. It was impossible to get that nasty, cloying smell out of the house, even when we opened all the windows as wide as we possibly could to air the place. It was as if Gertie's insufferable perfume had been soaked up by all the furnishings in the house, rather like a sponge. The interior of Gertie's lavishly appointed house was an opulent maze of sumptuously expensive resplendent antiques that she had collected over the years, that looked like they belonged in a castle. Many of these deluxe, rather palatial purchases had been made at antiques fairs and purchased at exclusive designer antique shops. There were glass cabinets displaying expensive, highly sought-after collectibles and artifacts that Gertie had collected abroad that were probably worth a fortune. Everything in Gertie's house was grand and swanky-looking, almost as if everything the woman owned had an expensive price tag attached to it. The luxuriant red curtains were heavy and velvety, and expensive ritzy Persian carpets were spread across perfectly polished parquet floors. In truth, I felt as if I had booked into a fancy boutique hotel for the next couple of weeks, but there was nothing remotely comfortable about staying in a house where you were terrified of dropping your Coca-Cola in case you left a nasty stain on the furniture, although there was a small, rather spiteful part of myself that would have enjoyed doing just that. But I knew that should I do such a thing, I would come against my mother's wrath, and that was not worth my while. I hasten to say that I was rather miffed to find that there was not a single speck of dust anywhere to be found in Gertie's house, for it affirmed to me my very worst fears, that Gertie was more than a little OCD. Despite the house's lavish presentation, it felt soulless and lacked any charm. I say that because it didn't feel lived in, whereas in our house there was always evidence of a life being lived, from a shoe lying haphazardly or rather untidily in the middle of the floor, or a newspaper left casually open on the coffee table. But in Gertie's house everything was pristine, so unnaturally perfect. You could have eaten your food off the floor without a problem. No wonder the woman had hated coming to our house for Friday night dinner when Lassie was around. It was absolutely insufferable for her to get Lassie's hair onto her clothes, and Gertie probably had an extreme aversion to dirt. No wonder she'd called Lassie a big bag of fleas, when of course the dog was anything but. I figured it would not be the end of the world living in the lap of luxury for just a couple of weeks, especially as my mother had been paid for the privilege. My bedroom looked like something out of a designer old-world vintage magazine. But I started to get used to it, and I liked the fact that it had pretty views over the woods at the back of the house, which at night were particularly breathtaking, under the light of a silvery moon. There was not a single day that didn't go by that I did not grieve the loss of my beloved dog Lassie. I felt a huge hole in my life without her around, but I tried to keep myself busily preoccupied so I didn't have to think about her too much. Every afternoon my mother would pick us up from school, which was a much longer road trip now that we were temporarily living a little further away. When we returned to Bertie's house, my sister and I would take our bicycles and go cycling down the country trail at the back of Gertie's home. It really did feel as if we were in the heart of the countryside. One day me and my sister, with the wind blowing in our hair, were both riding down the country trail when we decided to park our bikes against a couple of rather forlorn-looking trees. We chose to go exploring through an untamed area that was marked strictly prohibited. Why this was the case, I wasn't sure, but for some reason my sister and I were keen to go off the beaten track. I mean, what harm could it possibly do? And we were both curious as to why that part of the trail was prohibited.
"Jack, come over here! Look, there's a path going down to the left here! It's marked strictly prohibited, so we're not allowed to go down this path. Why do you think that's the case?" "I've no idea," I said, "but I mean to find out." The irony of ironies was, had the warning sign not been erected, the adventurous spirit within the both of us would probably not have been tickled, but doing something we weren't supposed to be doing felt both thrilling and daredevil of us. Me and my sister eagerly ventured deeper into the woodgrove, down the parts of the woods forbidden for pedestrians to use, and was clearly not part of the advised trail. We noticed how overgrown and unkempt it all but was. We discovered random trees had been lying on the ground. Moss and lichen had decided to cover the bark in an abundance of life, while thorny briars and thickets of foliage were entangled in burgeoning clusters, so much so it was sometimes hard to see the wood for the trees. Me and my sister were very glad we were both wearing sneakers,
as we trampled over the undulating, forsaken ground that was swollen with rocks that were embedded in the soil and jutted out rather angrily like teeth. Some of the trees in this part of the wood were so ancient that their roots were poking through the ground rather obnoxiously, like an octopus's tentacles. And on many occasions, me and my sister very nearly lost our footing, as some of the roots were very treacherous. "I don't like it around here, Jack," my sister said suddenly, turning around to look at me. I could see there was disquiet in her brown eyes. She seemed to be trembling, as if suddenly she'd become quite uneasy. "What is it?" I asked her. "Are you afraid we'll be caught trampling along prohibited ground? Don't tell me you're a wuss," I said teasingly, as I knew calling my sister a wuss would rile her up. My sister pulled a face. "It's not that, Jack," she said. "I'm not afraid. In that sense, I mean. But something is really off around here, don't you think? It feels foreboding, airy perhaps." "What are you talking about?" I asked her. My sister shrugged. She lowered her voice to a faint whisper. "Listen," she said. "Can't you hear what I'm hearing?" "I'm listening," I said. "I can't hear anything." "That's it," said Angie. "Don't you see, Jack? Why isn't there any bird song around here? Why is everything so unnaturally quiet? It feels menacing, don't you think?" My sister was right. Something wasn't right about the woods. I was surprised I hadn't noticed it before, and that Angie had needed to point this out to me. The woods in these parts were so quiet. The only thing I could hear was the rustle of leaves brought on by a soft breeze, but I heard nothing else. The familiar sounds of the birds in the tree branches above our heads, or insects buzzing around the wild flowers, could not be heard any more, and that in itself was peculiarly strange, paradoxical, inauspiciously threatening, you could say. Something just wasn't right, and I could suddenly feel the ill-omened pretentiousness the wood-grove seemed to invite, that sent a shiver down my spine, a silent warning, perhaps, that something was very much amiss. I tried, of course, to remain nonchalantly calm, so as to keep my sister at ease. I knew if she saw how flustered I really was, it would also increase her fear. "You're right," I admitted. "It does feel somewhat creepy. We should probably leave now." We were about to turn around and return to the original footpath when we heard an ear-piercing scream that like a knife went right through me in an icy chill. Angie and I looked at each other with a start. Angie had almost jumped out of her skin, her face growing as white as a sheet, her eyes filling with fear. "Oh, my God! Did you hear that, Jack? We need to get out of here quickly. I told you something wasn't right about this place. I could feel it in my guts." "Someone's in trouble, though, Angie," I said. "We can't just up and leave, can we? What if they need our help?" "I don't care if someone's in trouble. I really don't. I don't want to stick around to find out," said my sister. "I'm freaked out about this part of the woods, Jack. It's really sinister in here. I've got chills running down my spine. We need to get the hell out of here as quickly as we can. I'm not hanging around out here to find out who the owner of that scream is." "But someone might be in trouble, Angie," I insisted. "You heard the scream yourself. We better go and find out what's going on. It's the right thing for us to do, Angie. It would be irresponsible of us to ignore a cry for help, wouldn't it?" Angie's face grew all the more fearful. She was obstinately resistant. "I'm sure the scream was nothing," she said hurriedly. "They say that you hear all kinds of strange sounds in the woods. I think we should leave now. I'm not happy sticking around here." "If that's how you feel, Angie, you go back to the main trail and find your way back to Gertie's house. I need to check the noise out here for myself to ensure no one is in trouble." "Please don't make me go back on the trail on my own," Angie practically begged me. "I don't want to be on my own, Jack. I feel scared, really scared. Someone's watching us, I know they are." "Then if you don't want to go back alone, I guess you're stuck with me. Don't worry, we won't be long. How would you feel, Angie, if you learnt someone had a fall in the woods? They died of exposure. Imagine if their bones were discovered months later, and we both knew we could have been in a position to save that person and call for help. Could you live with yourself knowing that?"
Oh, don't be so dramatic, Jack. I told you the scream was probably nothing.
All of a sudden we heard a shrill scream. It was definitely that of a woman. There was no doubt about that in my mind. This time me and my sister Angie completely forgot about all our trepidation. We unhesitantly ran towards the scream. I was in no doubt that someone must be in grievous trouble. Maybe they'd taken a nasty fall. Perhaps they'd got their foot ensnared in an old animal trap. Anything was possible. Gertie had told us that in this woodgrove along the footpath, a while back, someone had got their foot ensnared in an ancient trap, and had almost lost their foot over it in the process. If there were traps still lying around and about this place, no wonder parts of this woodgrove were prohibited for people to access. My sister and I followed the noise of those screams, and then we stopped dead in our tracks. We stood several feet away from a strange-looking woman. She was wearing a white dress that wasn't so white any more, as it was covered in the filth of dirty stains. Her hair was a tangle of brown curls. She was bent over on all fours in the ground, rather like a wild animal. She was digging and scratching the ground furiously with her bitten fingernails. She was pulling up wads of soil in her palms, almost as if she was on a beach making a sand castle of sorts. The ground she appeared to be clawing so frantically was hard and unyielding, not exactly soft. While she was doing this, she screamed again, so loudly that the sound caused my inner organs to rattle rather precariously, and my heart to erratically bounce around in my chest. Angie was staring at the woman with wide, bug-like eyes. The scene spread out before us was so incredibly bewildering. I didn't know what to make of it. I'd never seen anyone behaving so absurdly before. "Ma'am," I said, running up to her, "are you all right? We heard you screaming." The woman looked up at me through wild brown eyes. Her face was smeared with dirt, which dribbled down her chin like chocolate stains, as if she'd been eating the dirt. It was hard to see what colour her skin exactly was, but the dirt was all over her face, so it made her eyes all the more pronounced, so they almost stood out on stalks. The woman looked up at me, and then stared at Angie. She gave me and Angie what I can only describe as a menacious, demented-looking grin, displaying a full mouth of yellowing chipped teeth. The look she gave us was both predatory and carnal, sending icy-cold chills down my spine. In that moment I knew there was something profoundly wrong with this woman. She clearly belonged in a mental asylum, or something. The woman let out a witch-like cackle that was so unsettling it turned my blood cold. I was about to tell my sister Angie we needed to leave at once. The woman began to scream again, like a deranged rabid dog. She ran towards my sister, violently throwing her onto the ground. Then she straddled my sister between her two powerful legs, holding her down. The woman began to violently pummel my sister with her fists, as if she was beating down spices with a pestle and mortar. Angie began to scream.
"Get off me! You're hurting me! Get off! Please stop!" she cried out. "Jack! Stop her! Stop her, Jack!"
"Get off my sister!" I cried out, trying to pull the woman off my sister, but she was surprisingly strong and resisted my efforts to drag her away. I let out a scream when the woman grabbed my hand, biting it so very hard that blood trickled down my skin, and my blood was on her teeth and dribbling down her chin in rivulets, while she continued to grin. I'd never seen anyone look so insidious in all my life. The next thing I knew, this deranged woman had her hands wrapped around my sister's neck. She began to squeeze it so hard, so much so that my sister's eyes were rolling in the back of her head, and she was gurgling. As the woman did this, she began to cackle like an old hag. I didn't know what on earth to do. I was desperate. I grabbed a stick that I found on the forest floor and began to hit the woman with it, but she willfully ignored me and continued to strangle my sister. It was almost as if she never felt the wallop of the stick I was using on her back. The next thing I knew I heard this dreadful scream, like nothing I have heard before or since, and then I realized to my horror that the noise I was hearing was coming from my own throat. I felt so powerless against this woman, who was draining the life out of my sister, and if I didn't stop her strangling my sister, Angie would surely die. There was no time to lose. I could not believe such an undernourished, emaciated woman of such slight proportions could be so powerfully strong, so much so that my efforts to avenge her seemed completely fruitless, despite the fact that I'd hit her so very hard on her back that pools of blood were seeping through the white fabric of her dress. But still she continued on her murderous mission to strangle my sister, and nothing appeared to stop her. All of a sudden a huge stone was hurled through the trees. I had no idea where it had come from, but it landed perfectly on the woman's head. She fell back, releasing her hold on my sister's neck, let out a moan, and then everything went disturbingly silent. My sister was gurgling for a moment, struggling to draw breath. Blood was running down her mouth. But she urgently drew in some breaths and sat up, looking rather dazed. I could see pink finger marks around her neck, from where the woman had attempted to strangle her. For a moment Angie was so dazed, so caught off guard, so confused, that neither she or I said a single thing. Finally she cried out,
"Jack! The woman tried to kill me! What was wrong with her? She was so wild!"
We looked down at the woman. I quickly felt for a pulse, but I was shocked when I could see there was no rise and fall to her chest, and when I turned her head over, I saw there was a huge hole in the back of her skull, where the brain tissue was weeping out. It was an abysmal sight, one that I shall never forget as long as I live. Whoever she was definitely deceased, and I hate to say this, but all I could feel was relief. The wicked woman could not get her nasty hands on my sister again.
"You killed her, Jack,"
Angie said, looking confounded.
"Oh my God, you killed her! I asked you to stop her from hurting me, but you killed her."
"No, I didn't," I said. "A stone was hurled through those trees. It hit her square in the head. But I didn't do it," I promised her.
"But even if I had done so, it would have been self-defense. If she hadn't been knocked out, you'd be dead by now."
Me and my sister instinctively looked up towards the trees, from where the stone had apparently been flung, and lo and behold, staring at us through a pair of wide, dark, treacle-coloured eyes, was a Herculean-sized male Bigfoot that was so ponderous he was easily 10 foot tall, with a robust, powerfully built muscular body that was so incredibly strong, I'm in no doubt he could easily push a tree over without a problem. Now I really thought I had to be dreaming. Was I even seeing right? This was the creature that had flung the stone at the senile woman and killed her. If it had not intervened, my sister would probably be dead. I was not afraid of the male Bigfoot, and nor was my sister Angie, despite the fact that he was the most intimidating creature that I have ever beheld in my entire life. But in every respect the Bigfoot, although enormous, was startlingly human, and with that humanity came a gentle kindness that was so tangible I could feel it, and I knew instinctively he meant us no harm. For a moment we stared at each other. The Bigfoot trotted over to the dead woman. He examined her carefully to see if she really was dead, and satisfied that this was indeed the case, the Bigfoot promptly threw the woman over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes. He turned around and looked at the both of us. He nodded very politely, and then turned around and disappeared into the woods, moving with such an incredible grace. Finally, he was gone from our sight. Me and my sister were so bemused for many days after this unorthodox cryptic event, we didn't even speak of the matter to each other. We knew every time we went into the grove that from now on we would be strictly sticking to the regular trail, as I would never dare venture into the prohibited part of the grove again. That was for sure. One evening, as me and my sister were retiring for bed, we heard a strange scratching sound at the front door.
"What on earth is that?"
my mother said, looking up from the magazine she was reading.
"Will you go and check it out, Jack, for me? I think someone might be at the door. I do hope it's not a raccoon."
I reluctantly made my way to the door, thinking that maybe it was a raccoon outside, ferreting around the place. But when I opened the door, I was then knocked over by a great big bundle of fluff, and then I realized in my amazement that it was Lassie. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I cradled Lassie lovingly in my arms, unable to believe that my dog had found me and that we had been reunited again. I had never been so happy in all my life. My mother and my sister came rushing over to Lassie, unable to believe what they were seeing. They greeted her with tears in their eyes, and then standing outside our door, watching all this going on, was a strange woman with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a befuddled expression written all over her face.
"Please mind my dog," she said. "Lassie, come back, will you? Please come back, girl. She's not normally like this," the woman apologized. "She just ran up to your house. I couldn't stop her."
Lassie ignored the woman and was covering me with wet, sloppy kisses, while I buried my face into her soft hair and cried.
"I can't believe it's you, Lassie. It's you. Where have you been, girl? I've missed you so much."
I looked up at the woman who was staring at me through round, questioning eyes, and without realizing it, she'd entered our hallway.
"This is my dog, ma'am,"
I told her, looking up at her apologetically.
"Her name is Lassie. She's been missing for 2 months, but now she's come back to us. This is a miracle."
The woman looked confounded.
"Lassie is your dog?"
she asked. She let out a sigh. "Stupid me. I can't believe I'm even asking you that. She's obviously your dog, young man. I've never seen her so excited to see anyone in all my life. I can see you have a very special bond with her. If you must know, I adopted her 2 months ago, when my husband brought her home. He was intending to put her up for adoption, but I wouldn't have it. He claimed the previous owners didn't want to keep her, because she was too big for their small children. I begged him to let me keep the dog. Finally he relented after much badgering. When Lassie ran off to Gertie's house a moment ago, I couldn't believe it. She seemed to have picked up an interesting scent trail that she really liked. I kept calling her to come back to me, but she refused to listen, and she's never ever behaved like this before. She was determined to come over here, and then she began scratching furiously at your front door. I knew Gertie was away. I knew she had some house-sitters watching over her house. I never suspected for a moment that the people that were sitting for Gertie were Lassie's original owners. Fancy that. I think she must have picked up on your scent, young man. I've grown very fond of Lassie over the last couple of months, but I can see the dog is yours, so there's not much I can do about that. So I guess I'll have to say my goodbyes to her and leave you be. I live next door, just so you know. I'm Gertie's next-door neighbour. My name is Vanessa." "Please don't go, Vanessa," my mother insisted. "This must be very hard for you to let go of a dog you've grown fond of for the last couple of months. But I can assure you your husband's completely wrong. We never did want to get rid of Lassie. We've had her for 2 years, you know. My husband brought her as a present for my son Jack over here, after much badgering." "I don't understand," the woman said with tears in her eyes. "I'm sure my husband said the owners couldn't keep Lassie because of their small children. Oh dear me, maybe I got the story all mixed up and confused. But I can see Lassie is so happy to be back with her real owners again. And it's right she should be with you. It's luck that she found you again. I'm only sorry I have to lose her like this. As I said, I've grown fond of her. She's a lovely, lovely dog." "How did you know her name was Lassie?" I asked. "Well, my husband told me her name was Lassie, of course. I assume the people who gave her to him must have told him that was her name." "Lassie was abducted," I explained. "I was walking down our street where we live. A man stopped his red Hyundai and got out of his car. He claimed he heard a pop in one of his rear wheels. He thought there might be a nail stuck in the rubber. He saw me walking down the street with Lassie. He asked me to check one of the wheels for him. When I examined the wheel, he threw Lassie into the back of his red Hyundai. He drove away with my dog. I was certain I'd never see Lassie again." "It's true," said my mother. "Jack was absolutely devastated, heartbroken he was, that someone would abduct his dog like that in broad daylight of all things. The man in question was wearing socks with sandals, I believe. I'd never forget a detail like that." The woman grew grave, her face drained of all colour. My husband drives a red Hyundai, and one of his worst habits is he's always wearing white socks with his sandals, and I can't stand it." The woman pulled out her cell phone and showed me a photograph. "Does this man look familiar to you?" she asked me directly. I studied the photograph. "Yes, ma'am, that's him. That's the man that abducted Lassie. I'd remember him anywhere." "This man so happens to be my husband," said the woman, her jaw tightening. "I think he's got some explaining to do, don't you?" The woman dialed a number into her cell phone, and a man answered. "What is it, love?" "It's me, Marvin. You better get over to Gertie's house at once, if you don't mind." "Is everything all right, Vanessa? You sound rather flustered. I thought Gertie was away. Aren't there people house-sitting for her?" "Come over to the house right now," said the woman stiffly. "There's something you need to see. It's urgent." "Be right over," came the man's voice. I will never forget the sheepish expression on Marvin's face when his wife Vanessa led him into the hallway and pointed towards Lassie, who was curled up in my arms, as if she didn't want to let me out of her sight, in case I would disappear on her again. "Could you explain what's going on here, Marvin? This young man over here, his name is Jack, claims that a man in a red Hyundai, fitting your description perfectly, abducted his dog Lassie from the neighbourhood where he lives 2 months ago. I showed him your photograph, Marvin, and he's absolutely insistent that you are the man that abducted his dog. I think you should start talking, don't you? It's very clear to me, Marvin, that this boy is the owner of Lassie. I thought you told me that the dog's owners did not want the dog anymore." "It was him that took my dog," I said, looking at Marvin. "You tricked me, sir, into believing your tyre had gone flat. Then you grabbed my dog and you drove off with her in your red Hyundai. How could you do such a horrible thing, sir?" "You're absolutely disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself," said my mother, looking furious. "What kind of a monster are you? My son has been grieving the loss of his dog Lassie for over 2 months. He's been in such a low place, you have no idea. If you wanted a golden retriever, why on earth didn't you buy one for yourself instead of stealing somebody else's? You live next door to Gertie. You can't be short of a bob or two. And even if you were, you don't go abducting other people's dogs." Marvin's face reddened, and in that second he looked like a deer caught in headlights. "I'm sorry, love," he said, turning to his wife and wilfully ignoring my mother. "It's not what you think. It's very complicated." I could see he was trembling. He certainly had not expected a confrontation like this. I could see that Vanessa was seething. Her nostrils flared. Her eyes grew as wide as saucers. "How dare you steal this young boy's dog, Marvin, and bring her home to me, claiming the owners didn't want her anymore? What the hell were you playing at? You allowed me to adopt Lassie, to grow fond of her, and now I have to give her back to her real owners. Why on earth would you do such a vindictive thing to them and to me? Anyone can see this young man loves his dog to death. Why on earth did you abduct her? It makes no sense at all. You've always been a good man, Marvin. Why would you do something so spiteful? This is not like you at all. Do I even know you?" "It was Gertie, love. She asked me to do this for her." At this, me, my mother and sister stared at each other in confoundment. I could see disgust was beginning to bloom over my mother's face. "Are you telling me," my mother interjected, "that my mother's sister Gertie asked you to abduct our dog? Why would she ask such a thing of you? I don't understand." At least Marvin had the good grace to hang his head in shame. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I told Gertie it was the wrong thing to do. I told her it was extremely cruel to abduct a young boy's dog, but she refused to listen. She wanted me to get rid of the dog. She didn't like coming to Friday night dinner at your house and getting covered in dog hairs. She disapproved of Lassie. She said you would be grateful once the dog was out of the way, and that I was doing you a big favour. Gertie asked me to find Lassie another home, to get her adopted. But when I brought Lassie home, just for a few hours or so, my wife fell for her hard, begging me to let her keep her. I couldn't refuse the wife, but I was rather terrified that Gertie would find out that I still had the dog. I had no idea Lassie would find her original owners. She's quite some dog, let me tell you. I'll give her that." At this startling revelation, my mother was furiously angry. She began slamming her fists in the air, as if she was attacking an invisible man. It was a good job that he didn't exist, or my mother would likely have killed him on the spot. "When I get my hands on Gertie, I'm going to kill her myself," she said. "See if I don't. How dare she do this to us? How dare she do this to Jack? Who the hell does she think she is?" "But why would you do this for Gertie?" Vanessa demanded to know. "Why didn't you tell her to get lost, love? You know it's wrong to take somebody else's pet." "Gertie was blackmailing me, Vanessa." Vanessa stared at her husband in disbelief. She looked horrified. "Gertie, our next-door neighbour, was blackmailing you. But why? I don't understand, Marvin. What did she have on you?" "Love, it's not what you think. You know that I dated Sasha for over 8 years before we actually met. Well, Sasha contacted me recently. She asked if we could meet up at a local coffee shop. She wanted some advice from me. I didn't want to tell you about this." "But why? Why ever not? Why would you keep such a thing from me, Marvin?" said Vanessa, frowning. "I just didn't want to upset you, love. But the rendezvous with my ex was perfectly innocent." "So you're saying Gertie blackmailed you because she saw you meeting up with your ex? Is that it? That doesn't make any sense to me at all." Marvin's face flushed bright red. "Well, we had a moment. We kissed for a second. Only a second, mind you. I realized at once it was wrong. It meant nothing. Gertie took a photograph of me kissing. She said she was going to show you the evidence of my cheating on you. But nothing happened, love. It was perfectly innocent. Hand on heart, I'm not lying." Vanessa was furious. "Get out of my life, Marvin. When I get back to my house, I want you gone. Do you understand? Gone." "Vanessa, let's talk about this, please. Don't overreact." "There's nothing to talk about, Marvin. By the time I get to the house, I want you gone. You better get packed." I watched Marcus scuttle away like a dung beetle, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for him, even though he had abducted my dog. "I must apologize profusely for what my husband has done," said Vanessa. "Now you take care of Lassie, will you?" "Of course," I said. We watched Vanessa walking away from Gertie's house. She looked like someone who had lost absolutely everything. And in that moment I told myself that as soon as I returned home, and as soon as Lassie came into season again, I would get her impregnated by Mr. Lehman's Labradoodle jet ski. I would give Vanessa one of Lassie's puppies. I knew how broken-hearted she must have felt to lose Lassie, after growing so attached to her, so I figured out that giving her one of Lassie's puppies would be a nice thing to do, and surprisingly enough my mother agreed to this. Lassie ended up having over 9 puppies, but they were the most adorable puppies I have ever seen in my entire life, and I'm not biased by any manner of means. I singled out a perfect female puppy for Vanessa. I put a collar on her with a pink bow and placed her in a large box. It was 8 o'clock at night by the time we'd reached the neighbourhood where Aunt Gertie lived. When my mother realised what Aunt Gertie had done, she told her that we never wanted to see her again, and she meant every word of it. So thankfully there were no longer any Friday night dinners spent with Gertie. "I know she's my mother's sister," my mother told me, "but she did a terrible thing, Jack, planning Lassie's abduction like this. We don't need someone like that in our lives. And for your information, Jack, I think you're right. I bet Gertie did kill her husband for his money. It's a damn shame it can't be proved, because the woman should be locked away for good." My heart was fluttering wildly in my chest when finally we arrived at Vanessa's house. My mother parked her car. Me, my sister and Lassie got out. Lassie was wagging her tail furiously as we walked to the front door of Vanessa's home. I knew that this impromptu visit was unexpected, as Vanessa had no idea she was about to receive a gift of a blonde bundle of fur. Vanessa opened the door, and when she saw us all standing there and Lassie at my side, her face burst into a bright smile. "Fancy seeing you all here. This is a lovely surprise. Lassie, that's you, is it?" Lassie charged up to Vanessa, wagging her tail furiously, and I watched Vanessa cradling Lassie in her arms. She almost looked tearful to see Lassie again, as if some nostalgic memories of her time spent with the dog had inadvertently been triggered. "Oh, it's good to see you, Lassie, again. Lovely to see you. Thank you for bringing her over for a visit. That is so kind of you. So very thoughtful, Jack." "Who is it, love?" came a male voice from the doorway, and then stepping out of the door was Marvin. His face coloured immediately when he saw us, because he knew exactly who we were. "I know exactly what you're all thinking," laughed Vanessa. "There is no fool like an old fool. Let's just say when I told Marvin to leave me for good, I missed him so very much that I'm afraid to say I invited him back into my life. I know you probably think I'm completely crazy, but I promise you Marvin did not want to abduct your dog, Jack. It was Gertie who blackmailed him into doing it. And the truth is my husband Marvin was not cheating on me with Sasha either. I met up with the woman. She gave me her solemn word that nothing had happened between the two of them. So against all the odds, I've taken Marvin back, and I've forgiven him for what he's done. But I still don't accept that it was the right thing to do, no matter how much Gertie was blackmailing him. There are some things you should never do." Marvin stepped forward, his face apologetic. "I'm very sorry, Jack, that I abducted your dog. I have never regretted anything more in my life. Please, will you forgive me?" "I forgive you, sir. I know exactly what Gertie's like. She's a force to be reckoned with. Anyway, I've got Lassie back, and that's all that matters. But next time, sir, if you don't mind me giving you a little bit of advice, please don't be bullied into doing something that you might regret, something that is wrong. It's not worth it. Don't let anyone blackmail you again." "You're right, Jack. What you say is true. I will take that advice to heart." "Have you seen Gertie around, Vanessa?" my mother asked her. "We don't speak to her any more, not after what she's done." "Well, she's still next door. She's got herself a new fancy man. Poor sod. I can't imagine what he's got himself into. He drives around a flashy sports car," said Vanessa. "But like you, we don't have anything to do with the likes of her anymore. Not after what she did." "Good, I'm very glad to hear it," said my mother approvingly. "That woman is absolutely toxic. Now, Jack, aren't you going to do Vanessa the honours?" "In this box, Vanessa, I've got a gift for you, from Lassie," I said, handing the box over to Vanessa. "This sounds intriguing," said Vanessa, taking the box from me. And looking inside, she let out a delighted squeal when she pulled the cutest puppy out of the box that you have ever seen. "Oh, goodness gracious me! She's so adorable! Look at her, Marvin! The cutest puppy you've ever seen! You're saying she's one of Lassie's puppies?" "Yes, she is. She's one of Lassie's puppies. She's half golden retriever and half labradoodle." Vanessa's face was filled with an unbridled joy. I knew in that quintessential moment that bringing Vanessa one of Lassie's puppies had been the absolute right thing to do. The woman was absolutely elated. We drove away down the street, and I caught sight of a tall, lofty figure looking at us from behind a tree on the footpath that led to the woods. I thought I'd imagined it, but my sister saw him too. It was the Bigfoot we'd encountered on the prohibited trail. He nodded his head at us and then glided back into the woods, and I was befuddled that we'd actually seen him twice in only a few months. Was it sheer chance that he had seen us on the one night when we had randomly chosen to visit the neighbourhood? Somehow, I don't think so. I try not to think about the strange, weird woman that tried to kill my sister, that we encountered on the prohibited footpath. But I have thought about the Bigfoot so many times, too many times to mention, that saved my sister's life. But this is a story that we both know that we will take down to our graves, for we haven't shared it with anyone, until now, of course. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.